Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Just wanted to let everybody know that there will be a reception sponsored by AIAS right after this lecture. And I want to take a second to offer my congratulations to Dean Bolello for receiving the fellowship of the AIA. So please join me. Next week, our lecturer is Dr. Daniel Doze, who is the Dean at Ryerson College in Toronto, and he is Dean of the College of Arts and Communication, and will be sharing with us, and also a past professor of the College of Architecture and Planning here at Ball State. But for today's lecture, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you a friend and a colleague, and I'm going to read this statement, and please listen attentively. It's very important for you to listen so that you can understand the lecture. It's very technical, and it requires some knowledge of physics, and certainly a lot of knowledge of music. And Art is an architect, artist, and professor of architecture. He is currently head of the Division of Architecture and Art at Norwich University in Vermont, the only NAAB accredited architecture program in northern New England. He is both a faculty and a member of the board of the directors of the Yes Tomorrow Design Build School. You might want to talk to him about that, where you could get some experience in design build work on the East Coast in Warren, Vermont. He's teaching courses in home design, build, and rustic furniture. After graduating from the University of Cincinnati College of Design, Architecture, and Art, way back in 1969, he began a long teaching career in various architecture schools, including the University of Texas at Austin, Ball State University, where he is a professor emeritus here from Ball State, the Architecture Association of London, Northeast London Polytechnic, and Norwich University, where he is teaching right now. As a long-time lover of recycled and found materials, he has explored collage as a representational and visionary medium for the last 2 decades. His work has been extensively exhibited, most recently in solo shows at the T.W. Wood Gallery and Art Center in Montpelier, Vermont, the School of Architecture at McGill University, Montreal, Quebec, and the Escuela de Arquitectura at the Universidad de Puerto Rico in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He is a proponent of 3H sponge theory, and I think he's going to explain that to us. Please join me in welcoming Professor Art Schaller.
Okay, how's that for sound? Good? Okay. I thought, well, it's a pleasure to be, I should start with this, a pleasure to be back here and in a place that's celebrating its 40th year. I just have watched it, having, I think, first started teaching here in 1969, and have seen the incredible impact that the school has made both on the university, on the state, and nationally and internationally. You have these trips around the world. And I think that's fantastic. That's a little bit of the sponge theory. You squeeze it out, and you're there as well. So more about that later. I thought I would today about, it's called Discounted Magic, and the talk is and it's a history of junk builders, collage artists, and then that myself included. I will end with some of my own work. I think the last time I was here was at the ACSA conference on weaving, and we did a workshop, and I showed a few things. So I have 2 trays of images, so there's a lot of images. It's in 4 parts. So the first part is about junk builders, and in that category there are some trained architects, but I've sort of really tried to not put too many of those folks in, thinking that these would be people you would be familiar with. So trying to show you things that probably you aren't familiar with. For the students here, the second part is a brief history of collage artists, and the third part is my work, a short, and it's in a chronological order, zipping along but showing the last 2 series, and the fourth part shows the process of doing a few of the pieces in a time-lapse thing, and then there is a conclusion. If it's boring, I have another assignment for you. I mean, you could not listen, and there are a lot of images, but the other assignment, we're always, I think, we are as artists and designers, architects, whatever you want to call yourself. I'm having a hard time distinguishing that seam between myself, architecture, and art, and probably are leaning more to the side of art lately in that sense. So there are a lot of images, but as an artist, I think, and especially as a junk builder, which I probably would include myself as well, we're really drawing in material all around us. And so as recently as today, there's inspiration. So I'll give you one piece of, and in the conclusion, this may, so this is the diversionary task for you. And I'm interested in Rem Koolhaas because he, as much as he designs, he also is a marketeer, a branding person, and really putting image out there, for better or for worse. And so as I was doing some of my research reading Vogue magazine, which I rip up a lot of to use, there's always great material in that, and depending on how you look at it. I came across this advertisement for a fragrance. Everybody has their fragrance. This was Carlos Santana fragrance. So some of you may not even know who he is. A rock guitarist. And so you can imagine what, I don't know. I would like you to imagine what that might smell like. But that's one part of the assignment, if you're not interested in what I'm saying. The other part is picture a fragrance by an architect. Blank by Daniel Levski. What would it smell like? Or Zaha Hadid, or fill in the blank. So that's if you're drifting off, just go there for a while. And it is about the senses. So having said that, I would give one more disclaimer. And that is that architecture is a very pluralist study. It's probably the best thing you can study, I think. Of course, I'm biased. And the disclaimer is that my talk is only a sliver of what's possible. And I really am pushing that everyone become a very pluralist designer and absorb all the sort of contradictory aspects of design. At the same time, I'm asking that everyone really have a lot of passion and don't be afraid of your obsessions, because it can help your career as well, or it can get you in jail. But do be careful with that. So that obsession will kind of lead you down one path. If that coupled with being a really schooled generalist, I think you can do great work. The obsessive work and the art scene really develops you as an internal human being, which can only help you externally in design. So that's one of the H's from the 3H sponge theory, but we'll get back to that. I chose discounted magic because most of these folks are using debris, and they're trying to find something magical about it. So I'm going to show you some what I call junk builders, and then list a couple principles that I think are applicable to the junk builders. This is a detail of a house in Belfast, Maine, by Fred Burns. Here's a little more of a detail of that. It's made with collected material from the beach and around, paint cans with just the dregs left in them, and so on. It's hard to measure, but nonetheless, it's, whoa. Did this fall off? No. Anyway. Okay, can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay, so I didn't turn it off, I promise. Nonetheless, Fred is obsessive. He just can't help but build. So that's important. I was liking the echo, but can you hear me in the back? Yeah? Okay, good. This is a work in Woodstock, New York by Clarence Schmidt. It's been demolished. Okay, no problem. And there's Clarence's self-portrait and Clarence at the side of that. I'll give you we'll pan back and look at an elevation of this house. Well, that's a detail of it. We'll get to the elevation. That's only a little corner of this. Okay? So Clarence actually retreated to retreated to one room in the winter. The last material that he was experimenting with was tin foil and tar and broken glass. He went through his wooden phase. Oh, whoa. That looks pretty good, though, actually. Are you guys doing this to me? Okay, let's see if I can get rid of that. Okay, no. So sort of turn off the one side. It's not going back. That should go back. Okay, thank you. I'll master this, yeah. Okay, thank you. Anyway, that's Clarence Schmidt. Here's in the same camp as, now this isn't going forward. Okay, this is a house in Salem, Oregon, where this particular fellow collected packing boxes from fruit in the grocery store and made this incredible flower garden with it. We'll pan back, and there it is. Wasn't popular with the neighbors. You can imagine that. But this is and so we saw a detail of it, and then this is that particular piece. These are visionary artists, obviously. This is in Indiana, and we just came across it, and it's a water-powered extravaganza made mainly of aluminum and plumbing items and pulleys and so on. It's in the southern part of the state. This is Henry Dorsey's house in Brownsboro, Kentucky. But I want to give you a little bit of a list of what I think is important about these particular designers. You guys, I knew you were going to do this to me. I knew it. Great. Okay. You like it there? Okay. That's good. Okay. So what's important about this, thank you, it does take it out of the spotlight of that, is that they're really solving any problem or the problem with the materials at hand. We do that as architects all the time, but what are the materials at hand? Do we go cross continents? Do we stay within a 300-mile radius? Do we recycle things, whatever it would be? They didn't have that philosophical debate. They just worked on with what they had available. This house is demolished as well. There is generally an improvisation within a typology. Okay, so this is in Iowa. It's a license plate covered, a normal house. So it's improvisation within that typology. There's also a lot of economy in this. Although there's a lot of collecting. You can imagine that someone had to collect all these license plates, and they're probably layered in some kind of secret code with the numbers. Who knows? I mean, I wouldn't put it past that kind of person. The other thing is there's a pure expressive drive. You know, as if, you know, what do you do when you have a little spare time? You're not going to watch TV. You're not going to sort of read a novel. You're going to go out there and work on your vision in that sense. So we went from wooden construction into things that are more masonry based. This is a running fence in Wisconsin. This one is really interesting in a morose kind of way. This is in British Columbia, and the constructor of this also ran a mortuary business. And the embalming fluid was in these square violet, I'm sorry, this is in black and white, violet bottles, you know, like a liter of formaldehyde or whatever it is. And so this person built an entire castle out of embalming fluid bottles. This is a detail, obviously, of the Watts Tower in Los Angeles. And there are trained designers that also have, I think, have this sort of incredible fetish or desire to explore the embellished surface. This is a detail of what I think is probably one of the best architectural works on the planet in the Park Güell in Barcelona. This is one bench within that. So there's a strong working relationship between Antonio Gaudí and the tile setters and tile manufacturers to make something like this that is very difficult to draw. Can you imagine the working drawings for this? Probably difficult. So that leads to one of the other principles, is that there is this difference between online decision making and offline decision making, and most of architectural practice is moving more and more, I think, toward what might be termed offline decision making. And that's that you conceive everything ahead of time, you make the set of instructions, and then someone else does it. Okay, so in that case, it's hard to do something like this. You need a little bit of that. The offline or the online decision making is that you just have a go. You get all your stuff or enough things to start, and you start. It's like standing at the top of the hill and trying to get down to the bottom. The offline person will calculate all the landmarks, do all the math between each one, find the shortest route. Once it's planned, then it may take them a few days before they start. Then they're on their way. The online decision maker just starts. Okay, so obviously this talk is leaning toward the just start person. I think a balance is really important. That's why I love Antonio Gaudí's work, because I think it is an extreme balance between that. This is in Vienna, Hunterwasser, and he's taking over blocks and blocks of the city and making housing for artists and anyone. Pretty startling stuff. This is a detail of one of the toilet rooms in that particular complex. Let's put it that way. This is the famous Isadora mosaic park and house. It's just a house and a garden. But the whole thing's a garden, okay, which is the last point in that pure obsession, pure creative drive. This is a exploration of bottle caps, basically, and the throne. You know, these people are called visionary artists or outsider artists, and so on. And many, we know too much, by even the first-year students, by studying design for a semester and a few weeks. You know too much to be an outsider artist. But as designers, we are always interested in these people because they seem to have, at least this is my perspective, a pulse on a creative madness that sometimes is taken out of us as designers. So this is just a delivery vehicle in Hong Kong. And these are, in Senegal, there are a lot of misprinting on packaging and cans and labeling. They collect them and make all of these briefcases and so on. There's one that I especially like. It's flat, but it looks like it's round in the instant coffee one. And they sell them as their livelihood. Their resources are, in a sense, collected around them. Hood ornaments. This is not my political message in this case, although I think work is completely out of whack in this country. We could talk about that later. It's good to work. It's good to keep doing things. That's part of design. It's not easy. You have to keep working at it. I did editorialize. These are I think these are in Ecuador. I'm not sure, but they are carnival headdresses and masks. There are some trained designers that have also sort of been bitten by this obsession as well. This is the nickname Prairie Chicken House by Herb Green in Norman, Oklahoma. Looks like the dancing prairie chickens or the debris of the wagons that didn't make it past Oklahoma, and so on. Also a famous black and white photograph of it. Interestingly enough, we know those. This is one of the Earth ships in New Mexico by Michael Reynolds, made with cans, packed tires, earth, plasters, etc. These are some of a few of the buildings from Auburn's rural studio. This one was done when Samuel Mockabee was still alive, the Butterfly House. These are also done, I included them because they're done with discarded materials in many cases, or salvaged materials. Not always. There is some pressure-treated lumber in this, and there is a budget to all of these. Most of the houses are in a budget of $25,000, so there is money flowing through this. This is a detail of one of their walls made with discarded carpet samples. The wall is really just laid up of carpet samples. Gets a little musty in that Alabama humidity, but it was free in that sense. Well, it's free, not regarding the labor. This is one of their later projects. It's a house called the Music Man's House, and you can trace these to one particular set of people who. In this case, there was one of the students was very proficient at welding and metalwork. So this is covered with, with a steel frame and infill in a crazy quilt sort of manner. That ends part one. Okay, you thinking about those fragrances in case you drifted off? Okay, good. Part two, it deals with a slight history of collage. And we'll start with two pieces that aren't really collages. This is an Edward Monet painting, drop down a little, of a portrait of Emilia Zola. But what's important is that if you look at this painting, there's a set of postcards at the top, his famous Olympia painting. I didn't know they made postcards of it, but they must have. And I'm sure he didn't sketch it out in miniature before he painted it. And so on. This is done in, quote, fine oil paint, which is yet it has, I put it in the beginning because it has an allusion to being made of scraps or composed of scraps, like many of these paintings do as well. This isn't money, it's painted money. Funny money in that sense. Maybe we could lower this just a touch to catch the top of those, if you wouldn't mind. So if we look at collage artists, I couldn't do it without looking at some Max Ernst collages in which he is now using printed material, which is, you'll see that's my fetish, and then reassembling them into these hybrids. So this part two will go from 2D graphics, and it'll cover a couple areas. So the first part are the sort of flat pre-printed pieces. That's a Max Ernst. Here we have another one. I'll go to the next one. Another Max Ernst, in which he's sort of, these are all copper plate images that are printed, and then he very, very skillfully cuts them out and reassembles them into these fantastic pieces. So we have the real and the painted to start with, and then we have these non-precious materials. I put another Max Ernst because there's a mixing of media in this sense. There's ink drawing and then paper at the bottom, and the cutout of that sort of cabinet piece in the middle is also has paper laid on it, printed paper and photograph laid on it as well. This is Richard Hamilton's famous piece called Pop, in which he's assembling, again, I believe this was in 1958, 1959, assembling elements of consumer society at that point to make this environment. So it's spatial, but it's clipped together and glued together. And here's one of the classics, Kurt Schwitter's. Keep in mind Kurt Schwitter's because we'll come to him in the end, in which he's really using things like pieces of advertisement, papers, tickets for the theater, and so on. So this is a non-painted piece. It's all assembled material. And then I think we should call him an architect, I think, because he built, this is the Merzbau in Hamburg, that was destroyed, built again, destroyed, and he built 4 of them. He finally built one in Wisconsin as he left Germany, not as slightly different. And so these are full room assemblages. Hard to, there were no working drawings for this. This reminds me of, a lot what the first year is doing right now, translating the painting to the environment. Everyone probably is familiar with Merritt Oppenheim. We're into for lunch, we're into the section of the collage artists where we're assembling odd juxtapositions of pieces. They're 3D. This is a little known Merritt Oppenheim piece. This is very popular at Thanksgiving time in this. So I love this one. It's got so many mixed messages. This Salvador Dali figure. Again, it's the same idea that there's a juxtaposition, the revolver and the faucet. I like that Billie Holiday song. Love is like a faucet, turns off and on. You don't, you can either shoot your lover or drown them in passion. It's got a lot of good things to it. The rat garage. Everybody played with these growing up, right? Rat garages. Just an odd combination of little rubber rats in these old filling stations. This is one of my students that he did graduate, and actually wore this for about a week, moving around the campus. It was a device to modify one's perception. It did use a sort of gloves that vets use to examine cows, and some spray tanks. It was a little toxic in that sense. He did bump into things. This is another part of that history of collage. This is the embellished surface or the ruined surface. So these are posters from the street in Paris, scraped off, remounted, and then exhibited in a museum. So there's a fascination and delight with the amazing surface or the decaying surface. This is a corner of a piece that's 4 times as large as this. These are little wiring caps from Renault automobiles, a little wire. of them, and so they produced this entire field using something that is thought of as ordinary, banal, unnecessary, turning it magical, hence the name of the talk. This is one of my favorites. This is a carpet that's embellished with fried chicken wings sewn on there. And it's hard to walk on, and it's difficult if you have pets. But other than that, it's really nice. And when the carpet gets worn out, you just kind of replace them. It's hard to vacuum as well. That's a trouble. So I always like this one. This is by Arthur Dove, and it's a portrait of his mother, done with actually some wallpaper from her house. And bits of pieces that were important to her. She must have read the Bible every morning, had coffee, sat in. You can visualize the room she sat in. Of course, we look at the contained environment as in the box as another category, and this is one of Joseph Cornell's pieces. One of the best field trips to go onto is I think is going into the Joseph Cornell room in the Art Institute in Chicago. It's really splendid. I hope everybody has gone there. Another Joseph Cornell. A reclusive kind of guy that had just shelf after shelf of things that he collected and then used. Okay. So I think we're on to, the next tray. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to show you. No, it's not right. There are some. Should be some other. Yeah, but is there anything else in that other tray? Okay, let's go back and see if. Okay. Yeah, it's not doing anything. This is the one we're doing. Oh, the power button for it. Thank you. Okay, so we're still in, this is Robert Rauschenberg, where he would sort of do a walk around his studio in New York, collect things, and then make a piece. You get the idea, the same. This is one that I really like called Sheepdog. So sort of a taxidermied piece where that's nice. This was in Mass MoCA Museum in North Adams, Massachusetts. This is the multi-sided coffee table by, from Philip Gardner's Designs for Better Living. And the great teddy bear, soft, cuddly toy by Philippe Starck. A hybrid. So the last ones were hybrids. Good. One size fits all. Oh, these are rough constructions by Edward Kienholz. This one called State Hospital. This is Jean Tingley's destruction machine, one of his destruction machines in the Museum of Modern Art courtyard. It sort of catches on fire, hammers flail around in bathtubs, and then in the end the fire department comes and knocks it down and they cart it away. This is a contemporary piece called the Apparati for the Distillation of Vague Truths, and it uses the artist has collected all kinds of chemistry lab items, and you can see that there's a mock experiment going on to find truth. And just another normal shrine, tinfoil, rubber rats, etc. These are collages by a Danish architect artist, Niels Ole Lund, in which you can obviously see the architectural themes. I think this one's called The Well-Appointed House, or the something to that effect of the modernist house. And so you can see bits from art and architecture history in this space. So he's using the material that he's collected from publications and put them together. It's another, there will be several pieces by him where he's taken Mario Botta's building and placed it in a romantic setting. Or a James Sterling building and placed it under a freeway. These are pieces by Romaire Bearden, maybe our country's most famous collage artist. I would think he would be, and sort of part of the Harlem Renaissance, and really studied. These do mixed painting and ink and drawing with glued images on this street scene. Big show of his recently in New York. Here we have one entitled sort of Sunday Lunch. So we get glimpses into dwellings or the street. They're both urban and rural. In this case, there's a rural theme. I mean, he grew up in a rural setting, moved to Harlem. Using both fabrics, printed paper, paint, and so on. That's Romaire Bearden. Oh, another street scene. There's a recent recording by Branford Marsalis that uses a Romaire Bearden image on the cover, and I think it's titled Bearden Revisited. So as music, he's going back to looking at Harlem of that particular era. He did a whole series of jazz musicians and so on. This is just reminding me that we're going to start on to part 3. And so this image does have some things that are important. It has something on the ground and it has something in the sky. So this is going to be some of my work. So just to recap part 2, we have covered those issues of real and painted, unprecious materials, hybrids and combinations, the decaying surface, the contained space and box, and an unpredictable process. So for me, in my work, there is a notion that we all step into the river of design at some point. And I've just been in the water a while, longer than some in the room, not as long as others in the room. So everything that I've shown you is also part of my collective past and inspiration. I'm going to show you things that are downstream from me, from what I'm doing now, but also lead to things that I'm doing presently. So I'm interested in another thing that I should talk about. One notion is that modernism is a history of dematerialization, that we're dissolving material all the way down to, we're in a very ephemeral environment, right? I think right now we're operating on in a digital realm. We're not touching material as much. We're actually walking down the street with cell phones as if the street's not there, and so on. We're somewhere else. So there is a dematerialization theme going on. My work, and I think everyone that I've shown thus far, is about dense material, is about sort of an inescapable dialogue between making and material. So I'm also interested in that. But I'm interested in symbolism and things that are hard to measure. They are dematerial or they are internal material, I guess, as opposed to ephemeral material. So I have some other inspirations in my work that I'll talk about. I love Bernard painting, but it's the magical surface, the sort of the $1 million square inch, if you had it. So I think he's painting that sort of radioactive surface in a rather bourgeois content, but beautiful and magical in that sense. I'm also very much interested in light and shadow, both in deep shadow and darkness. So another one of my heroes. So I'll show you a few pieces that started me back 20 years ago doing collage. Which will show some other themes. I'm fascinated with a certain mechanical technology that we're still around us, as opposed to electronic technology, which I have a mild fascination for. You can see how I've bungled just the slide changer, so I'm not as comfortable with that. I'm also interested in a strong sense of energy and connectedness and movement, and themes of containment. So the vessel, the box, the jar, and so on. And I'm also interested in color and light. We'll talk about symbolism later. So I was drawing and using colored pencil, but on this particular series, I glued some pieces on. So the iris, the rainbow goddess, is really a Xerox piece glued on. The top is from a Greek stamp, also glued on and incorporated in the drawing. So I'm breaking that discipline. This is one of the first collages which mixes both things torn out of magazines, paint, the paint and magazine. This is then one in that particular series which uses pencil and drawing, xerography, and glued images as well. This is the last time that we'll see in the series that I've used anything but glued paper. So this is a compulsion, an obsession, I don't know. But so and I work in series. So in this case, so this is the first series that I'll show you. And I won't show you all of them, just a few. So this is a particular theme of the throne or the chair. So I have my personal symbols, which I'll read in a little bit. But here we have pieces from a Louis Barragan building in it, which doesn't matter, but I know that they're there, from an advertisement. And so there's a dialogue going on between an overhead or a big sky theme going on and a ground plane theme going on. So these are all glued paper. There's some comedy or improvisation. These chairs are chopped down, moved closer. They're in kind of a funny dialogue with one another. In most of the early work, there are no humans in it. They are just glued paper and surfaces. That led to another theme. These are beds or dream beds. These were exhibited in the Young Institute in Evanston, Illinois, the dream folks in that sense. And so these are also settings which there's action has taken place and we've glimpsed perhaps what has gone on. The bed also is the great portal for the dream or the other environment. They are also very spatial. I mean, I sort of compose in a ground plane, overhead plane, surround plane, all the things that I think are quite standard architecturally in this sense. So this particular bed, this was on the cover of one of the recaps at one point, I remember. It's probably in the archive somewhere. Sometimes I try to build them. This is a bed that was shot in our dining room here. And sometimes they stay as purely two-dimensional pieces. So that yellow is a wall from a Lawrence Booth house. But it's just a wall on this. This is toward the last of that bed series. There's several in each series, so I won't show you too many. But what's important in this is one of the other themes starts to come in, this idea of orbiting sticks, or this idea of scribing a space within a space, or a centering sort of space. And so this is one of the last ones on that, which leads to then the next tray, which I must, here we go. And so these explored tiny little constructs on the ground plane, juxtaposed to a reflective sort of a stellar realm or an overhead space realm. This Moon Over Pool is the title of this. I think this was one of the postcards from the Indianapolis Art Museum at one point. Eclipse halted construction in this. So we see these kind of, this is a time I was also interested in earthworks and stellar and solar alignments, etc. There's stories behind all of these. I won't. Pearl Circle, this kind of thing that people sort of, I think, obsessively build. A little temple in the yard. Floral Square. I mean, the carpet itself, the floral carpet, is a Garden of Eden in its own right. Glacial pool, so there's an idea of the ice and what you see below the ice, ice melting. There are a lot of these. You can see that I am obsessive. I put this in because when Sonny and Daniel Does and I were teaching thesis, everybody did a clock. This was my particular clock. And the theme was exploring time. And so this is migrating bird wings on one side. The other side is the goddess Nut that's painted on Egyptian caskets with feet and arms on the earth plane, discoupling with their earth god, Pal. As they discouple, the space that we live in is there. So hence that's a sycamore leg and with red oxide paint, and the egg and the winding mechanism of migration and the seasons and so on. I still have this on my desk. I love it. I was also exploring the idea of totems or tall cabinets. It's out of focus. I'll go to the next one. It's out of focus as well. So I do this. Oh yeah, thank you. And so again, these are now objects in shallow space in this case. So these are sometimes they're twinned up with other objects into room settings. Oh, well, okay, I'll read something. Take a drink of water and read something. So I told you my big themes, which were layered space, color and surface, light and shadow, ground to sky, and making things precious out of non-precious. But I should talk a little bit about symbolism. Are we back operating? You could just skip that slide, if you can. So I think symbol operates at 4 levels. And we can't help but do things that are symbolic. Even if we try to ignore it. But there are personal symbols, which we all have. Sometimes we don't wish to share them, sometimes we do. There are social symbols, which then as a group, or a small group, we seem to share in their meanings. And then there are cosmological symbols, which are constructs that we as humans and designers can make in order to, I guess, reconcile our position in the universe. How are we doing? Okay. And the last one is our metaphysical symbols. Metaphysical symbols are really hard to figure out, and some people say you can never figure them out. You just encounter them. So in my work, I know I have my personal symbols. And sometimes if those are accepted by other people, then they move into social symbols. And I certainly have a cosmological side to things, which I think architecture is cosmological in that sense. We're dealing with the earth plane and the sky plane and the 7 directions. We build in this. We're in the 7 directions all the time. that's a cosmology that we can't shake. We can ignore it and think they're just walls, but they are addressing a direction, and so on. So some of my symbols, should we go back to that fragrance for a while he's working on this? Some of my symbols are the painted stick, and sometimes I can't figure them out. You know, it's the axis mundi, it's the column, it's the line in composition, whatever, you know, however you wish to call it. One is the orb, whether it's the egg, the container, in that sense. The container is another one, the jar, the cabinet, and the room. And then the sort of the metabolism that all of this has, okay? So those are some of my personal symbols. I'm also, each series also that I work on has a particular theme. So we're in, if this gets working again, we're in the tall cabinet theme. And we've seen the throne, the bed, the marked landscape on the bottom. And then we'll see things like humanoids and eyes, and finally the last piece. We're doing a whole repair. Okay, anybody want to describe verbally what Carlos Santana, oh, there we go, we're back to that. We'll have to do that. Okay, so these are just thanks, these are some more tall cabinets, okay, guarding the portal to deep space in a horizontal layering as well as a vertical layering. Put that one in, let's skip that one. We already saw it. Let's skip that one. You guys put that one in back in upside down. This one is right side. So this is maybe toward the end of the tall cabinets. They're long series. They're hard to make. I've made some of them. They're a little top heavy. It's hard to deal with them. But they are very humanoid, which I think probably led into the next series. Thanks for putting that one upside down too. The next series. Which are, I call them the mythic portraits. So, I'm doing a lot of reading. I hope you're taking a lot of literature classes and looking at all those gods and goddesses, because they are just little pieces of ourselves. And so here's a few examples of my take on my pantheon. Mom and Dad. So this is the sort of benevolent guys. There's a lot of Walt Whitman in this. There's Whitman's journal and a few things, photographs from his study that I clipped out. I was looking at Australian sort of X-ray paintings, Aboriginal X-ray paintings, so you can kind of see inside of this. He's this sort of Mr. Natural. Here's this sort of electronic sun, trickster guy, maybe the sister. Young precocious guy, the aunt. You like your aunt to look like this? I always wanted my aunt to look like this. But there's also architectural space in it. It's a window and objects and other subtext within it. Sorceress. Shaman. Okay, so there's tons of these. So I think this is all I'm going to show. But I was also, if you look at kind of ads in the backs of magazines, or sometimes they block out the eyes to kind of disguise identity, or the idea of a mask, or the idea that these are beyond ordinary people. They're magical folks. So after that, I just looked at the eye, and these are this is called the Eye series. Show you some of those. Bit of Egyptology in this one. would make nice glasses. Okay, so we're into another series, and it's starting to repeat itself. These are wall cabinets. So the idea, these are, I think, fairly architectural, that the cabinet, if you just put building in, as cabinet, you might look at these. These also have contained mysteries inside of them. That was the Titanic cabinet. Now, I'll show you the last two series, which are fairly recent and I've just exhibited recently. And I'll show you them in their entirety. There's only 12 to 15 in each one. And so this is, I call this one the frame phenomenon series. It's a little bit more of an architectural space in which there are frames or windows to spaces beyond, but it's also shallow space in terms of those. And then within each of the frames, there are either glimpses into something else or collected papers that are slightly out of focus. So sometimes they're really close-ups of just a wall, as these were. There usually is an opening to space beyond, or things happening in the ceiling plane or the overhead plane, or constructions in a room. And this is the last in that particular series. This is the last series that I've completed. I'm working on things now, but they're incomplete. This is called the Mystery Box series. In these, there's generally a closed container that is connected via some utility system that has a metabolism, that is in a space, that has light cast on it, that has something going on the ground. And this is purple box on a table. And there's I'm collecting papers that have sort of a light that, I guess it might be a good time to look at light. One thing that I try to do is I collect, everything that I collect has been printed at one point. So it has, for the most part, sometimes there's flat paper and so on, but for the most part it's a photographic image, so it's been photographed with the light source present at the time of the making of the image. And then I collect images that sometimes are reflections, like you can see there's reflections in this, or that are slightly out of focus. I assemble them by parts so there appears to be a light source acting on them from what I've selected, and then I construct and add shadows from the light source of the piece itself. So there are multiple light sources in that sense. A little out of focus, but yeah, okay. So you may recognize some of the advertisements that these come out of as well. Some of the source pieces you may not, doesn't matter. It's better. Thanks. Sort of sometimes humorous, funny in their color schemes. Twin together, big ones, little ones, in spaces. Okay, this is part 4. We're getting close to the end here. How am I doing on time? Yeah, okay. So I thought I'd time lapse some of these. So if you get some idea of how I make them, no trade secret. I mean, it's just collecting all the stuff and putting them together with an idea in mind. So it's both online and offline decision making. Back to some of these themes. I have a structure that's the architect in me. There is a structure. There is a notion. And I have a freeness of how I look at all these pieces and discover things that are happening. So this was step 1. Step 2, I've added a few more pieces. This is all part of that same series, so you'll see that I usually work on a series and run it into the ground. I'm just done and start another one. That's how I think everybody ought to work, as a matter of fact. You just have to just keep going, plowing through. Adding a little more. You can see the shadows are constructed toward the end. The last pieces comes into focus. I usually work on a few at a time. Then when I get into the finishing phase, I just stick with one. Like to work late at night in winter, for the most part. Listening to music, little wine, it's good. You have to wash your hands a lot, the glue gets on it, just things like this. This is the last of the Frame Phenomena series. More space happening, more object happening. I think that's the end of that one. Show you one more. This was one in which, after I gave a talk, I probably should have done this here. I had materials out and let people have a go. And then I worked on them. So these are beginnings. That's the other aspect of it. There's a serendipitous chance kind of quality that I think is really important. I think it's good to just, like, especially in the first year, switch desks every once in a while, work on everybody else's project. You'll drive one another crazy, but you'll probably have better ideas. Okay, so here is one. Yeah, I just hated these when I started. You know, it's risky. The end of that one. So here's another one. And then we had an exhibit. I made photos of the steps, and then we exhibited the final piece. There was a lot more to work with in this one. It's probably the end of that. Yeah, this is our last slide. So I go back to Vermont tomorrow. So I'm sad to go back for a number of reasons. And this is a Romare Bearden. He also looked at the seasons and so on. And actually, the view from our kitchen window looks a lot like this, don't you think, Ann? It does, yeah. So I have a few concluding thoughts. I think design is really the best revenge that we have, and good design and art, it includes that. Design without art is really dreadful, and I hope we never go there in that sense. And so I think that's one of our best revenges. I think we'll get back to the fragrance if we have to. I think this idea that I'm a fan of the Roman god Janus, which has, do you know that deity? Above doorways, beginnings and endings, eyes in the back of the head. When you think you're going one way, you're going the other. It's a great sort of symbol that exists over ancient doorways, I think, to remind us that we're in this world, but we're in other worlds. And design is really layered. I alluded to it in this layer of symbols. One thing that I could leave you with that I think is something that you might try to achieve, and that's gymnastic thinking. And it's almost like a parlor game. As soon as you head, and I think collage definitely does that. You have all your materials there, and things are springboarded from them. But gymnastic thinking is you start one place, and it's going to trigger you into thinking about something else. And that's really important. And some researchers think that's a key to creativity. It's not your SAT scores. It's not any of these other things. It's how you can negotiate that electronic, brain-wise, electronic sort of short-circuiting and changing of paths. The other twin to that, the other side of the face of Janus on that sense is something called homospatial vision. And that's also collage, has a lot to do with that. And it was actually kind of interesting to see when you saw in the first part of the lecture where the two trays were overlapped a little bit. Homospatial vision is the ability to see two or more discrete entities occupying the same space simultaneously. That's, I think, what we do as spatial artists, and space is our medium. And both, I think both in art, we allude to space, and certainly in architecture. So that kind of electronic thinking, that gymnastic thinking, that intense spatial vision would be something that I think you could find useful and spend a lifetime trying to cultivate. I think collage is an excellent way to do that, both therapeutically and the other thing is, I think, find your own voice in whatever obsession you have. Don't go out and start ripping up magazines. That's not my point. Just showing you some of the things that I do. So that's one thing. There's another thing that I think is kind of important that is I want to sort of end with looking at one of my favorite authors, Tom Robbins. There's in the book, I think, Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates. There's a character in it called Schwitters. Okay, remember we saw Kurt Schwitter's collage, we saw the Merzbaugh. Schwitters was a kind of a quasi-CIA FBI agent, thought of as, and they had two classifications. They were either cowboys or angels. Cowboys were classic, play it by the book, offline decision makers. And angels were kind of tricksters, coyote kind of guys, bending the rules a little bit. And as Tom and Robbins is in real life, I would imagine, I've never met him, but his character Schwitters was an angel. But Schwitters had this is a long story, but I think it's important, a lot more important than the fragrance. The fragrance is not important. Schwitters had a grandmother, which was his teacher. She insisted on not being called grandmother, but la maestra, which I think is teacher, right, in Spanish or Latin. Okay, so, they were always debating, and she set things to him. They were in this time of the possibility of intelligent design, which is a great term. In that sense, they were always looking at evolution in a Darwinian sense. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not going there. So hence they were looking at what they called the missing link theory. You know, what was that link between the first two-leggeds, and so on. But the grandmother had this really great theory that was also defied Darwin. And she had a notion that a true human being had 6 qualities. And that if you didn't have these 6 qualities, you were a missing link. And in the contemporary times, I think this was written maybe 5 years ago, maybe 6, anybody that didn't have these qualities was a missing link, and they were gaining in numbers. So it was a reverse Darwinian quality, and a lot of them held public office and made a lot of decisions and so on. So these, I'll leave you with these 6 qualities. They were humor, imagination, rebelliousness. I think these junk builders were funny guys. They were rebellious. They had a lot of imagination. Eroticism, and there was a subnote in what she said. It's not like raccoons mating and all this. It's really, it's really a sensuality, studying, the beauty of things. A sense of aesthetics, just for pure aesthetics, and spirituality. If you didn't have any of these, remember, you're a missing link. So that's what I think, and these are things we kind of try to teach in design school, but not always do. But university is supposed to do that because you're, so those are my closing thoughts. I could answer any questions. Yeah, thanks. If anybody wants to answer.
Make a presentation before everybody leaves. This is a homecoming for both of us. For you coming here, we're happy that you're here. We'd like you to accept a token of our appreciation and sort of memory of this space, and including a cup that you can display prominently on your desk in Norwich. So right there, for our 40th anniversary.
40th, terrific.
And
thanks. Is this a Frisbee?
And there's a Frisbee too.
We don't allow that in Vermont.
Now, if I knew, I would have included 6 things, but I only had 3, so I'm sorry. Now that I'm a missing link.
Thanks.
Any questions?
Art, can you, what size are those works that you were showing us?
The last ones, they are 16 by 20. And so I actually I've gotten very organized, and I work on these blanks and kind of store them in sleeves and kind of work that way, and usually print them one-to-one directly. Some of the earlier ones were much larger, and I reduced them. I actually started when the college had this wonderful process Seagraphrome process camera that was like huge. It was an antique that went, out of production and so on. And that was a wet chemistry that you could go direct copy without making a negative. So that's what the size thing is.
I have 2 other related questions. One of them, and maybe these are nonsensical in what you're doing, they had to do with how you know when you're done. And maybe it has nothing to do with knowing, and maybe it has nothing to do with being done. But I was curious about the whole issue of judgment in work like this.
Yeah. Well, the pieces kind of start out as being on focus, or they are positioned. I mean, I do visualize the picture plane, so to speak, as space, and I'm actually putting objects in space, that move back and forth, and slowly building up the theme of whatever the piece is. It gets more and more in focus, and then it's just in focus, done in that sense, and I stop. I rarely go back after I've stopped and ever work on them again. In that sense, there is a point of there is a point of covering things up. You get a lot of things out there. You tear some things, or I tear some things, to remove parts before they're even entered into the composition. Some of them make it into there, and I have to keep covering them. So there is, in some cases, and there is a testing, just like painters. You do the x-rays of paint different origins within that. There is that layering lends itself to that. And there are times when I do cut and peel something out, but rarely. Sometimes I do cut a piece, place it over another piece before it then goes on to the, yeah, that answers it. Sometimes when I'm cutting out a piece, I come back into my source material and see something through the window that I've cut onto the next piece and take the two. And so those are accidents that are unplanned. But then when you make the choice, they are planned. And so they, yeah. I don't know if that answers that, but yeah.
Art, a great presentation. I have numerous questions, but I could just ask three. The first one is, in looking at the work, and you know very well that I have two of your very early works hanging in my studio.
Two of my favorites, by
But as I look at these, I see complexity has increased over time. Do you attribute that to the literary component that you brought to this, or?
Yeah, it's well, I think it's at two levels. One is and sometimes I'm a little bothered by it. I've really gotten to know my craft, let's say, and so the complexity has increased, and I'm working a little bit smaller. So I'm a little more intricate. They become more intricate. They become more complex, thematically and technically, I guess. Yeah, I don't know why. Sometimes I look back at how almost seemingly crude some of the first ones are, but how, like a lightning, how would I describe it? How clear they are in their editing, I suppose, or their vision. So I have noticed that they're evolving into that. So much that the things I'm working on now I'm mixing paint, and I'm working on wood, and I'm working on paint, and I'm varnishing over things. Because it's led to something else. So, yeah.
Are you still transforming these into prints?
I am, but all my exhibitions recently have been a mixture of the two. I'm having a little problem in I work with a really high quality digital lab right now, and we do kind of scans and so on. The process cameras are no longer available. If I work with the Ilford film, I have to then take the original, make a negative, and then make a print. So I haven't been going that route, I've been going the other route. So I do want to make them archival, but I've found a lab that does something that's almost as good as that old camera, I guess you would call it a camera, process printer that we had here, but I don't think it's there. I don't think they make them anymore. I think
the last and most important question, is your clock still working?
It is.
It is? Mine are broken.
But it falls over, that leg falls over all the time. It just puts people off when it comes crashing down. I think they've done something. But it's fading, the paper's fading, it's not as good.
I have a question about if you've looked at any of the work of, especially John Cage's early work, like the Williams mix, and sort of mixing everyday life into a sensible collage.
There's a whole realm that I didn't show, but yeah, definitely, I like that. I love sampling in music too. It's collage as well.
That was my other
Love it and hate it.
question. And if you deal with sort of critiquing, which a lot of that music is about, is sort of critiquing our consumers' culture and image-based culture. And have you explored the realms of Photoshop and sort of electronic collaging?
Yes and no. I've stayed away from that. I mean, I use it. I do, and I think Photoshop is one of the best things going in that sense for making things. But I haven't. No, I've avoided doing that. I'm a real fan of Bruce Moore, and he has this great thing called the Unfinished Manifesto for Growth, or something like that. And one of them is avoid software. Everybody has it. And so, I mean, that's Bruce. But I like it. He also says, stand on everybody's shoulders. We're all in it together, something like that. And like it, do it again. If you don't like it, do it again. So it's that sort of thing. So yeah. So I have avoided that myself, which is one reason that I've been showing slides, because when I scan the images into discs and show them through digital projectors, I have to change the color, and then it's a different thing. It's not. I'm also really interested in the hand, which in the 3H sponge theory, one of the H's is the hand.
I'd like to.
Did that answer that? I don't know.
I'd like to invite everybody for the reception again that has been sponsored by AIS, and maybe you have a chance to talk one-on-one with Art. Art, thank you.
You're welcome.